I start with a spoof, and this is my spoof that's showing how we start. There we go. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Down to Earth with Harriet Kamek. We got lots to talk about. It's Tuesday, the very first day of October. So one of my favorite months because at the end of this month, what happens? What happens on October 31st? Halloween, where we get to act crazy and I get to feel like a kid again and I get to eat lots of candy. So bring on the candy, people. I will be eating candy this October 31st, and it's Halloween, and the year is winding down. Unfortunately, that's the downside. That's the only downside to this. The only downside to all of this is that the year starts to wind down. And while we may not be exactly happy about it because we may not have gotten everything we wanted done this year, we're still grateful that we're on this side of it. So say shout out to everybody, and especially giving honor to God. I sound like I'm in church. Giving honor to God and thanking God for his mighty miracles and his mighty works and his graciousness that has allowed us all to still be on this side. And while we pray for those who left, we thank God that we're still here, right? Right. So we're grateful for that. It's Tuesday, the very first day of October. And I just want to say happy October. And it's boot season, which I'm personally not happy about. And legging season, I'm not happy either. Why should I be thrilled about having my body encased in all kinds of clothing where you dash from the building to the car so you won't effectively freeze? And your eyelashes won't freeze off, and your face won't be frozen. Oh, it doesn't sound like fun, but guess what? It is what it is. So whether I like it or not, guess what? I still have to do this. So whether I like it or not, it's still gonna be October, regardless. And I guess I have to do this. Oh, sucks to be me, right? Sucks to be me. I'd say so. I'd pretty much say so, right? Right. So today I want to talk about sex tourism, and I know I have a dedicated viewer. Thank you for joining me. Thank you so much for tuning in. I want to talk about sex tourism. It's a subject that's very close to my heart. I was at an event last week and I promised someone that I would talk about it. And I was at an event and they came to my attention and asked me if I were aware of what happens in Cambodia and Thailand. And I said, yes, as a matter of fact, this had been brought to my attention about 10 years prior to. And the type of sex trafficking that happens in those areas and whom it affects and so on. And I promised that I would talk about it. I promised that I would certainly delve into it. So in keeping with that, I kind of thought that I would bring to mind some sort of idea on what sex trafficking is, and to sort of give you some idea of why we're concerned about sex tourism. Sex trafficking is one thing. It's the trafficking in sex of people who are being used for sex. So they're exploited. Trafficking is about exploitation, force, and coercion, right? So the entire body of trafficking is modern slavery. And we refer to it as human trafficking because they're trafficking in persons. There's drug trafficking, right? And there's also there's drug trafficking. We know there have been animal trafficking where they've taken people across borders. We also know that they have ripped other countries of their assets, their historical values and assets. So there's also that kind of trafficking. But when it comes to human trafficking is broken down: sex trafficking, labor trafficking, which includes domestic servitude, and of course, organ trafficking. And so when you think about trafficking, let me just clear my throat for a bit. When you think about trafficking, it's obvious that trafficking uh, is correlated, is directly tied to tourism. And I'm going to tell you why. So I have a definition for you. So I'm briefly going to tell you what sex tourism is. So there are different parts to sex tourism, right? So sex tourism basically is travel to a different location for the sake of sexual activity, particularly with prostitutes, particularly with sex workers. Now, there is domestic sex tourism where people, for instance, leave one city and or one state and go to another state expressly for the purpose of having sex with people whom they normally wouldn't have sex with, whether they're going to have sex with children or whether they're going to have sex with other vulnerable populations, right? The World Tourism Organization says that sex tourism are trips organized within the tourist sector with the primary purpose of having commercial sexual relationships with the people at the destination. So sex tourism in a nutshell is travel organized by people to have sex with the people at the destination. Now, there are some places that are real popular for sex tourism. You all know them. I don't need to say them, right? Brazil, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic. You all know that. That's why you all going to the DR. You go there to have sex, right? Amsterdam, Kenya, Colombia, Thailand, Cambodia, Cuba, Indonesia, right? The countries popular for female sex tourism: Southern Europe, Greece, Italy, Cyprus, Spain, Portugal, the Caribbean, of course, led by Jamaica, Barbados, and the Dominican Republic. And other popular destinations include Bulgaria, Tunisia, Lebanon, Morocco, Jordan, Azerbaijan, Fiji, Colombia, and Costa Rica. Lord Jesus, help us. Why are we concerned about this? Well, the most common type of sex tourism is men seeking women. Less common forms including female women seeking men. Hello, somebody. And this is the part: adults seeking children. Sex stories come from developed countries in Europe as well as the United States. Asian countries, including Thailand, the Philippines, Cambodia, and Nepal, are common destinations for sex tourists. Lord Jesus. I don't know how much when I came across it, I promised someone that I would talk about it. And then I got stuck because I didn't want to. And then it came to my mind yesterday that I should talk about it and that I have to talk about it because of the ramifications and the implications that are involved for vulnerable peoples, especially children. In Cambodia and Thailand, for instance, there are men who travel from the United States and Europe, right? And who travel specifically for the purpose of seeking to have sex with children. Missionaries in Cambodia, there are plenty of people. There are few people of American and Canadian origin who, and some Europeans as well, who have established shelters and facilities to provide relief for these children. So they have the statistics. They can tell you that there are children as young as 8 who have been sexually violated by grown men from Europe and the United States. And that these children, sometimes by the time they live in brothels, by the time they start having periods, they become pregnant, they are forced to have abortions, some of them have children, and so somebody has to care for them. These children are often left behind, right? So they are rarely ever taken care of by the men who have had sex with them, right? They're abandoned. They end up with sexually transmitted diseases that sometimes prove life-threatening. They end up with diseases where they can't even have children and they are left to survive in a country that is already economically deprived, right? And so they're sheltered, they're forsaken, they're abandoned. Nobody wants to have anything to do with them. So a few people with good heart take it up on themselves to go over there and start a shelter to provide help because they recognize that somebody has got to do it. That, in a nutshell, is what sex tourism is. Sex tourism is whether you someone travels. Like I was just reading a story about a guy. It just came across my feed about a guy from Ypsilanti, Michigan, who went to Ohio, of all places, took his 4-year-old daughter to Ohio to stay in a motel, and of course, he approached a group of young children. So, he was using the daughter as a decoy. That's often what they do. They have a small child with them to make it seem like they're friendly, right? To make it seem like they're non threatening. And he was really just using his daughter as a decoy. So he left his daughter in the hotel room while he walked around looking for willing victims. He apparently identified 3 young girls who were in a hot tub, and he kept following them around the resort. So their parents and everybody else got concerned, and he went and sat with them and said his daughter wasn't feeling well. Could they come and sit with his daughter and play with her? And they said no. So the parents called the police. And when the police came and went to his room, of course, they found that his daughter had been knocked out. He had given her gummy bears laced with melatonin, of course, right? Why am I saying that? Is because he traveled. That's a form of domestic sex tourism. He traveled from Ypsilanti to Ohio. He did not want the folks in Ypsilanti who know him to know that that's what he does, that he has sex with children. So he goes to a resort knowing that there are probably people there, they're family friendly, so there are probably people there who have children looking for willing victims. This is why I say when you're out with your kids, keep an eye on them. If you're not careful, make sure you know where they are at all times. I'm always amazed at how people send their young children in a crowded restaurant to the bathroom by themselves. I never understand that in today's day and age. Or you're at the mall and you tell the child who is 8 or 9 or 10 to go to the bathroom by him or herself or with other young children, and you are just walking around with your friends lolling. I'm amazed at parents who do that. I'm also amazed that when I'm at a hotel and I see young children just running around the hotel unsupervised, where are the parents? I'm like, so you don't care about them? Well, somebody else is going to find something to do with them, right? But in keeping in mind what the parameters and the description of sex tourism is, now you see that we have a problem. The problem we have is not the demand. The problem we have is not the supply, it's the demand. People who are seeking to have sex, right? People to have sex with vulnerable people. So some of you all leave here to go to the Dominican Republic. That's sex tourism. You're going over there because you hear the girls are pretty and they're available and they're young, and you can't do it here because if you do it here, you're going to get caught. So you go over to the Dominican Republic to have sex with young girls. Some people go to have sex with young boys. I've heard some stories, right? So some of you leave here and you may not even reach as far as the Dominican Republic. You may not even reach as far as Colombia or Costa Rica or Gambia or Kenya or Thailand or Cambodia. But you do go to Las Vegas. And you go to Las Vegas so you can go get your groove on. And you're like, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas? That's sex tourism. You go there for the expressed purpose of having sex. That's your purpose. So don't say, well, some people are, I got to get away. I got to get away. I got to get away. No, you got to get to where you can have sex with people whom you can control. Right? And the reason that this is bad is because what we're finding, according to the World Health Organization, is that there's sexually transmitted diseases that are left in the wake of that. There are children, if they have had sex with children, there are children who have had children sometimes. So you have children who are not cared for. And the guy just comes back here and he's like, hey, sorry, sucks to be you, but I'm me. Hey, and he comes back and he's married and he has a family and he's a respectable businessman. He's a CEO, vice president, or whatever. Because obviously, this is happening amongst people who are what? Affluent and people who can afford to do the travel. Right? So this is not your ordinary woes who just, hey, man, I just got my tax return, so I'm going to go to the Dominican Republic. These are people who go there once or twice a year because they can afford to. So ladies, check your mans. Check on your mans. Yeah? Check on him. Why is he going away? So why do you go to Cambodia so often? Sometimes they're not even telling you they're going to Cambodia. They go somewhere else and then fly from somewhere else to Cambodia if they think that you're watching. So check on your mans, people. Check on your mans. Ask the question. And a lot of guys are uncomfortable when I talk about stuff like this because you're like, well, somebody has to talk about it, right? Let's talk about gay tourism, for instance, gay sex tourism, right? That is a thing where people leave one country, especially in countries where homosexuality is frowned on or not tolerated. Do you know what happens? Men do what? They leave those countries and they go somewhere else where it is acceptable. A couple of years ago at the Winter Olympics in Russia before 2016, Vladimir Putin said clearly, do not come here to have sex with our children. Don't bring your AIDS here. And he was adamant about it because he knows that gay sex tourism is what? Is a real thing, right? Right? So what is gay sex tourism? Gay sex tourism is just people who go to have sex and and it's a flourishing market for bisexual and bi-curious tourists, right? They go and explore. Some of them are saying, well, I can't do this at home, so where sex tourism is widely possible. Right? Can you believe this? For example, in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, gay sex tourism has become a popular niche, hosting a racially diverse market. My God in heaven. Are you believing this stuff? And you thought that Harriet was making this stuff up. Go Google it. Right? Because I was alarmed. Right? I was, say, alarmed. I was totally, totally alarmed. I could not believe how much how much this was going on, right? It's amazing to me. uh it's amazing to me how people, right, how people utilize the tools that we have available today, and frankly, as long as the behavior is taking place between consenting adults, that's your business, that's your money, that's your life. It's happening between consenting adults. Don't get children, don't destroy children in it, right? I know of one story where a guy had gone to the Dominican Republic, and this was relayed to me by his friend, and he had gotten a girl there pregnant. He had gotten the young girl there pregnant, and she had the baby. And I said, does she know she can take the baby to the US Embassy and get a US passport for the child and bring the child to the States? And he said, well, that's exactly what he's fearing, because if she knows that, then she could come here to live and ostensibly get child support money and hold him accountable for his carelessness. Do you see what I'm saying? And because people in those societies lack information and lack access to the internet, they lack the means to find out all this information. They really don't know. Some of these children who are born as a result of some sexual tourist activity, if these folks know that the children who emit as a result of that, just go to the US Embassy and provide proof. If you get a copy of his driver's license or whatever and prove and do, and prove that, you get a passport, you take the child to the States, and he will have to pay for it. Maybe that will stem the tide of it. Because you got to ask yourself the question, is it some lure? Is it something? Why do people proliferate in this? Why are people, is it something in our nature where you just want to have sex with different people outside of sex with children? I'm just talking about sex between consenting adults. Do you find that, because some people, we have said, I read a University of Minnesota study that said what transpires in sex trafficking a lot is that men like a little violence in their sexual activity, and they like the outcome. They like to have control over the outcome. So they like the commerce that is involved in it, the exchange of money, because then the exchange of money does what? Gives them the power. Perhaps this is what sex tourism is all about, is the fact that they're paying for it, and in paying for it, because there's still some places in the US where prostitution is illegal, right? And in paying for it, that gives them control over the sexual experience. So they're paying you for an hour, so you got to do exactly what I tell you to do, how I tell you to do it, and what I want. Because here in America, you can't just do anything with people, because you will go to jail for it, or you will pay a price for it somehow. See what I mean? So people are finding ways to explore themselves. Now, in terms of gay sex tourism, that's a whole other animal. That's for people who want to explore whatever, if they're bi-curious, or if they want to find out, but they don't want to do it here because the ramifications of them doing it here could be detrimental, could prove detrimental to their existence in terms of social, right? Social and civic life and political life. That's primarily what they're concerned about. They don't want anybody to know they're bi-curious, or they have explored their gay sexuality. So they keep it away from the mainstream, and where prying eyes could take a photo and upload it to the New York Times. Do you see where I'm coming from? So you have to look at sex tourism as, is it part of pornography? Yes. It's a 32 billion, actually it's now $100 billion a year industry. So of course, yes. And if travel organizers and people who organize travel recognize that there is a market and a complete niche for it, guess what? They're all in, and they're making money. So there are tour guides, there are the people on the ground who provide hotels and car rentals and other form of touristy activities, bars and so on. Anybody ever been to South Beach, Miami? South Beach? Anybody? Take a ride, right? Just take a ride. If you're ever in the area, just take a ride down there. You'll see, pretty much see what I'm talking about, right? So sex tourism then, is it detrimental? And how detrimental is it? As far as I'm concerned, it's detrimental when explored from the perspective of people, of adults having sex with children. That's really the part of it that I want to focus on, where adults are traveling to another location, let's say here in Detroit, and people are leaving the city of Detroit, leaving the state of Michigan, and going to a whole other state so that they can explore themselves having sex with children. That's the part of it that I am concerned about, because that has, and the ramifications are sexual trauma. A lot of what we're seeing in the world is where, and this has been going on from time immemorial. This is not something new. However, we thought we had arrived at a point in human civilization where some things we left behind, some things we thought that happened because people didn't know any better, they didn't have access to good information, and we have overcome some of those sexual urges. But it seems to me that the more we ramp up our civilization, the more we live in a postmodern world, seems to me, is the more we cling to some of the issues from the past, such as deviant forms of sex. Anybody who wants to have control over the outcome of the sexual activity, irrespective of how their partner feels, is someone whom I don't think is necessarily someone I want to be near, or you should want to be near, because that means they can introduce activities into it that are perhaps not good for anyone. Like I said, in the University of Minnesota study, one of the things they found was that people who engaged in sex trafficking, and especially people who, and these were not careless people. These were not people who, for want of a better word, didn't have anything better to do. These were people who were married. These were men particularly men seeking relationships with women, especially, they were married, had a lot to lose, right? They had family, they had wives, they had jobs, careers, they had public and civic profiles. So they had a lot to lose. But what they said was they wanted control over the outcome. So they introduced violence into the activity. So a lot of the girls were beaten up, and especially the younger, the more vulnerable, especially those who came from other countries and who perhaps were undocumented or who were just getting a footing in the society. Those are especially more vulnerable. People who lack economics or lack the upward mobility to go forward, or children who sometimes take on the role of taking care of the family, but instead of going to get a job, they turn to sex. God help us all. I just kind of had to pause there for a minute when it came to that one. I literally, Lord Jesus, take the case. I literally had to feel that one. Lord have mercy. So what I have read in places like Cambodia and Thailand, just bear with me as I struggle through this, because like I said, this was not something that I'm comfortable with, and this was not something I wanted to talk about, but I felt that I needed to bring it to your attention so that you can be aware, so that if you know someone who perhaps has expressed a desire to participate, at least you can tell them why they shouldn't. Yeah? At least you can share with them this podcast. If they're planning to go, maybe you don't say anything to them, but you share this podcast with them so they can hear the reasons why it's not a good idea, right? So in Cambodia, for instance, and Thailand, where large groups of people are left economically vulnerable and who have no other means of support, there are people from the larger cities who travel to these outer regions. And what they do is they go and tell the parents that they're taking the kids into the city to work as housekeepers and maids, and work in laundromats and work in restaurants as waiters, and so on. Nothing could be farther from the truth. That's the last time, more than likely, that child will ever see his or her parents again, right? They often take them to a brothel. They certainly aren't putting them to work. The work that they're giving them to do is sex, where a grown man, often a Westerner from either Europe or the United States, is introduced to them, and that's their first introduction to sex. Imagine an 8-year-old child's body being penetrated and being terrified and torn apart by some nefarious individual whose only sole intention is to gratify himself. Now think about that. If this were your child here in America, what would you do? And this 8-year-old child she doesn't just have sex with one guy. She has to have sex with the other and the other. And the thing about this sex tourism that I don't understand is the opportunity for sexually transmitted disease is so widespread. And you wonder where a lot of these STDs are coming from, right? And the opportunity, because the girls themselves, they're rarely ever kept in habitations that are hygienically clean. I've read one story where they don't shower much because it's not like they're interested in their hygiene. They just want them prettied up for the next guy to do whatever the guy wants, so that the pimp, the person who controls the brothel, gets the money. And it's a ring of people. The little guy whom she interacts with, that's not the one you need to worry about. Is the guy on top of that, on top of that. This is Harriet Kamek. Join me in just a moment. We'll continue this broadcast. Right? And so what we are seeing, right? What you find invariably is that the little guy is not the one you should worry about. It's the big guy, the people behind it, because it's a whole ring of people caught up behind this little guy who owns this sex ring and who provides the resources for them to go into the countryside and recruit these young children, take them from their parents. They pay the parents The parents don't even realize that they're selling their children into sexual slavery. There's a book out there that you need to read. It's called The Heavens Are Telling. You need to read that book, The Heavens Are Telling, right? And I read this book years ago and interviewed the author, and I bawled because it was my first introduction to international sex tourism. And I could not believe for the life of me that this was really happening. I wanted to believe in the purity of everybody, that everybody is pure and have pure intentions, and that nobody is doing anything nefarious. I just wanted to believe that. But unfortunately, the world is not structured like that. There are people who have proclivities that they find themselves that they have to attend to, and the ways in which they seek to procure their relief and their forms of entertainment for these proclivities leave the rest of us aghast. But it leaves the victims. It leaves the victims untended. It leaves the victims uncared for and damaged for life. They're damaged physically. In one story that I read, the young girls who had been taken and placed in a shelter were so severely traumatized after having repeated abortions and abortions that by the time they're 17 or 18, they are done. They can't have sex anymore. Their bodies can't make children anymore. They've had so many abortions, their bodies are finished, and they are now traumatized. They never went to formal schooling because they were extracted and taken from the countryside when they were very young, and they don't know how to survive. So had it not, were it not for the shelters and the generosity of individuals who have gone into those communities to help them, and even so, it is very difficult to convince the children to even come out of the sexual slavery. You do know that. It's very difficult because they're so used to people saying, I will help you. Every man whom they have had sex with promises them that he will take them to America or Europe. And he has no intention of doing that because over here, he's Mr. CEO, he's Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, Mr. Business Owner, right? He has no intention of bringing that stuff here. He doesn't want anybody to know that that's what he does. First of all, it's illegal. He will go to jail for it. Secondly, he doesn't really want you to know that that's what he's engaging in, but it is what it is. And my friends, this sex tourism that is sex trafficking because it's the trafficking in persons. It's using force because the children are forcibly taken from their parents. They are taken either by force or it's fraud. So they promise them something that doesn't happen. They're coercion. So it fits the description of the Trafficking in Persons Act, which is the federal law that governs these activities here in the United States. So when those three elements are involved, it's called trafficking. And sex trafficking is the exploitation. Trafficking is the exploitation of people. Taking people under false pretenses. You're going to help them, but you're not going to help them. How many of us are guilty of that? You say you're going to help somebody, but you don't. That's a whole different thing. You know, when you just be a friend enemy, you know, your friend is an enemy, so you call them frenemy, right? That's what my daughter says. So they say they're going to do something for you, but they kind of sabotage in the meantime so it doesn't get done. Yeah, right? But they're still pretending that they're with you and they're your friend, but they're a friend enemy, right? My children are schooling me on that one, right? But this is not what this is. This is exploitation of people. This is people, grown people, adults, taking advantage of vulnerable people that they couldn't do here in the United States. If they did that here, they would be subject to the laws that prevail. And this is why we have to have laws. Because if we didn't have laws, God forbid that my child or yours could be laid carelessly. These folks would take up a child and pick up a child, and like that man in Ohio from Ypsilanti who was walking around the hotel complex, the resort complex, looking for children. And just, if had it not been for parents who were alert and astute, they would never have realized what he was doing. He was in the business of recruiting. Next thing, he would have taken them back to his room to, you know, under some false pretense. That's the fraud right there. To tell them that, well, you're going to stay with my daughter while he performs sex acts on them. But God. Say but God, people, because I kid you not, I'm still there's still an element of the Jamaican in me. They try to excoriate it and kind of scrub it out and get it out, but there's still that element in me that's untamed when it comes to someone violating any female family member of mine, especially male or female, any vulnerable family member of mine. But God, say, but for the grace of God, say it. I kid you not. And so when we look at sex tourism, it has become an area now that we kind of have to look at, because we're like, well, you have a guy who works in your corporation, and you notice that he goes to Thailand and Cambodia and these places I just mentioned, Costa Rica, Brazil, and so on, more than once per year. Why does he like to travel? I'm very wary of people who like to travel to some parts of the world. I recently was trying to connect with someone, and I found out that they travel frequently. Now they're female. Problem is they're not married, but they travel frequently, and one of their favorite places to go to was Africa. So at first, I was like, well, there's a little neo-colonialism there. Maybe they like the feeling of feeling superior, so they take it to other parts of the world. But I'm like, how old is this person? I wanted to look a little bit closer. I'm like, so your specialty is there? Okay, okay, I see you. Right? I'm like, indeed, that's what that is. Okay, okay. Do you see what I mean? Sex tourism. Something to think about. Something to think about as you go through your day. Something to think about as you even sit down and talk to people around you who are friends. How often they travel, overseas. Some people are always getting on a plane. I gotta go. I gotta get out of here. Some people are always getting on a plane. Watch their destinations where they're going, because some people will create diversions. I mean, the government's never going to catch anybody, because first of all, the government doesn't care about where its citizens really go, right? You're free to move about the country, move about the world, right? So the government is not interested in that. But the government is interested in the commerce. So if you're moving goods and services, they're probably watching you, right? That's an activity that falls under their umbrella, right? But if you're just traveling, they're not really caring about that. But you yourself, if you have a brother, a cousin, a sister, right? A brother especially, and he has a family back here, or sometimes they get divorced. The rate of divorce is so high. No wonder, because they're always getting on a plane to go somewhere. Why do they need to stay to be married? Why are they going to stay married when they have this proclivity to have sex with people who are vulnerable, who can't ever stop them, who can never tell them? And especially in today's world, the world we live in today, that is cloaked in the Me Too movement and the Time's Up movement, and men are feeling like, I'm caged in, so I want to have sex, but I can't have sex. Yes, you can have sex. The law never said you shouldn't have sex with consenting adults. The law never said you shouldn't. The law never said you can't. The law gives strict definitions about it, because it's to protect all of us. Because while you, a normal guy, is just, man, I'm just living, I'm with my girl, I'm with my wife, I protect my family. That's you. Thank God for you. But there are other people who are not like you. There are other people for whom this is sport. And this is activity that they engage in. And this is activity that they somehow participate in, glorify in, and perhaps they enjoy a level of satisfaction out of it. And you're sitting there like, wow, sex tourism, whoever thought? So there is transnational sex tourism, which is what occurs between countries. So somebody leaves the United States and they go to Cambodia, for instance. And then there's domestic sex tourism where, folks just get on a plane and just go to Vegas and say, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Now, if it is happening between consenting adults, who cares? Right? Consenting adults means it's devoid of forcible, it's devoid of rape and forcible actions. So there's no sexual assault or rape there, because that's two people saying, hey, guy says hey to girl and girl says hey back. They're getting it on. Good. That's what we want, right? We want people to be consenting. But where people are forced and where people are pushed, or where they're exploited, that's where the concern has to happen. And that, my friends, is what it's all about. I mean, just think of these countries, and I want to tell you the countries, because people think that. Listen to this. Brazil is considered to have the worst child sex trafficking record after Thailand. UNICEF notes that sexual activity is often seen as a private matter, making communities reluctant to intervene in these cases. Right? The US has strict domestic laws that hold accountable anybody who lives within the borders, who travels abroad for the purpose of engaging in illicit conduct with a minor. As of 2009, sex tourism and human trafficking remain fast growing industries, of course. But you hear that, though. The US has strict laws. So if you go over there and you travel abroad for the purpose of engaging in illicit conduct with a minor, the laws, they will find you and they will get you. So the laws do prevail, right? Uh, so the countries, again, the countries, the countries where this is most prevalent, the countries, my God in heaven. Lord Jesus, help us. The countries where this is most prevalent, I'm going to read them to you. And I'm like, oh Lord, I don't know what to say, but here it is. The countries where these are popular destinations are Brazil, so watch out, people who love going to Brazil, Costa Rica, the Dominican Republic, Amsterdam, the Netherlands, particularly Amsterdam, Kenya, Colombia, Thailand, the Philippines, Cambodia, Cuba, and Indonesia, particularly Bali. Southern Europe, Greece, Italy, Cyprus, Spain, and Portugal. The Caribbean, led by Jamaica, Barbados, and the Dominican Republic. Brazil again, Egypt, Turkey, and this particular place in Thailand called Phuket, which was actually written off in the book I'm telling you about, The Heavens Are Telling. Gambia, Senegal, and Kenya in Africa. Bulgaria, Tunisia, Lebanon, Morocco, Jordan, Azerbaijan, Fiji, Colombia, and Costa Rica. Do you see a theme emerging? What's the theme? Vulnerable peoples, places that are known for economic disturbances, places that are known to have exposed constantly to social and cultural upheavals, where there is instability. Political instability leads to social displacement. Social displacement means there's not enough money in the economy to provide goods and services for all the citizens of the country, thereby leaving a vast majority of the population vulnerable. Now you set the stage for sex trafficking. So the United States does have laws about this, right? So if they find that you're traveling from the US to go engage in illicit behavior with a minor, when you come back, they will deal with you, right? We had to put some control over it because this has gone on for too long. And it was affecting the image of America abroad. Plus, it's wrong to exploit people and to have sex with children. And it was just damaging to certain American interests, right? And we're not talking about people like the Epstein visa. Everybody talking about the Epstein visa, how that was a broad form and a good representation of sex tourism. Jeff Epstein engaged in an activity where he brought people into the country using his wealth, right? So he brought them in on planes. They had no formal entry into the system. He brought them in on plane for the sole purpose of having sex. Vulnerable people from, so he specialized in Europe, Southern Europe. He specialized in Southern Europe. So he'd bring people in from Southern Europe, brought them into the country, used them and sold them. He literally sold them to his friends. So his friends were paying a fee That's why they can't tell you the origin of his wealth. When anybody can't tell you the origin of their wealth, you know that it was not obtained by traditional methods. They can't tell you how he made money or how he acquired so much because he was bringing in sex slaves and people were paying for it. It's called the Epstein visa. So he brought them in on his plane. They came off and it paid off everybody, apparently. People just come in and they disappear, literally. Then they go do whatever they need to do. Some of them stayed here, some didn't. You have to wonder what happened to those who perhaps rebelled. And this is going on and on and on because wherever there are disparities in income and economics, there's going to be what? Some form of exploitation. Somebody is going to pay the price, right? And so I want to leave you with this thought. I want to leave you with the idea behind it that the reason, like I said before, this was a difficult subject for me to tackle. I did not want to talk about this. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to deal with it, but I can't ignore the fact that even at this very moment, it's happening. It's happening right now. That somewhere in Cambodia, in Thailand, in Gambia, in Kenya, in Senegal, in Brazil, in Colombia, in Costa Rica, somewhere there is someone having sex with a child who has the affluence and the means to get on a plane, pay the ticket for the hotel where they're going, and pay for the means to have sex with that child. And leaving that child destroyed, riddled with sexually transmitted disease, destroyed forever. People, some of the stories I've read where the young child, their inner systems, their fallopian tubes are damaged as a result of these activities. And no one cares. Nobody cares. Right? No one cares. The children are vulnerable. They're economically vulnerable. They're extracted. They're paid fees. And I've described in detail how it works. Right? The ringleader, he goes into the countryside. He convinces the country people that their child is going to work. It happens everywhere. China kind of shut it down. You can't just go into China and do that kind of stuff because they'll shoot you. Right? China kind of just control that. Doesn't mean they don't do it internally, but you can't just go in there and do it. They shut it down. And the day we become economically vulnerable in America is the day when it will happen to us also. So we got to be careful. This is why we have to shut it down so that that never happens in the United States of America, so that it never happens that people in other countries think that they can come to America and take American children and destroy them like they're doing everywhere else. Yes, we're wrong for doing that. We should never do that. But at the same time, we got to protect the United States and make sure that our children living within these borders, our children who are here, are protected from any kind of ravage that could emanate from any kind of transnational sex tourism, whether it's domestic, where some guy drives from Ohio to Michigan or Michigan to Ohio, or whether just some person somewhere in the world at some point thinks that it's okay, let's just go to America and we can just take these children off the streets and just pay them so we can have sex with them. We got to shut it down. For all I know, it could be happening right here, because right now Detroit is a border city. For all I know, this could be something where people are coming across the border from Canada. I'm not accusing Canadians of anything. I'm just saying, for all I know, this could happen, right? And people just come across the border. Let's say we get into a situation where America is no longer the might and power that we are today. We're a powerful nation, yeah. We are enjoying the moment. Yeah, are we on top? Yes, we sit solidly on top of the planet. We dictate to everybody, bow down before me, I'm the king. Right? That's what we say. Yeah, you better bow. We are it. But what if there comes a day and time when we're no longer the it, when we no longer have the military power that's backing us? Because our strength comes from the power of our military. Our strength comes from the power of our economy, the power of our dollar. So we dictate to everybody else what you do and what you don't do. Make no mistake about it. When you are the emperor, that is what happens. America is a modern empire, and I love it. Why? Because it means that my children are protected. So nobody can ever jump on a plane, come from somewhere else, and come over here thinking they can have access to my children. You better think again. Ain't gonna happen. So, as long as this is why we have to be aware of these things so that we create barriers ourselves, we create boundaries. Teach your children, folks, teach your children stranger danger. Tell your children, you don't just leave your children to run around in a mall by themselves. Come on, people, be aware. You young parents out there, you have your children, and sometimes I wonder, you're so caught up in your phones, so caught up being with your friends that you send the children, you're sitting in a restaurant that is crowded and you send your children to the bathroom by themselves. It's called parenting. There is no off time. The off time is when they're 18 and they exit stage left to go to college. That's your off time. In between now and then, you're vigilant. You're on the job. That is the job of being a parent. I see so many young parents at the mall. The children are way over the other side running. And I'm like, for the love of God, help me, Jesus. Because you got to pay more attention. Don't just send your child. Sometimes I just need a break and I just want an off time. Who told you that when you signed up to become a parent? You thought it was just about the gender reveal party? You thought it was just about showing people how great you look pregnant and you have a baby bump? That baby bump becomes a human being and a real person. It's not a doll. They need to be cared for and monitored and loved and to be kept safe. That's an important part of parenting, right? So pay attention to these things and you have to be aware of it because everyone doesn't think like you. So when you think, oh, I'm just so tired and I'm just need an off day, and you just let them go run next door and play, you don't know who next door is videotaping that. You don't know who next door is touching them inappropriately. They probably won't tell you, and you won't know because you're so busy just having a sip of wine because it's just such a terrible day at work. You do not get that luxury anymore. The minute you become a parent, you know what it becomes? It's vigilance. If you're going to relax, they're upstairs in their bedroom. And they're down the hall in their bedroom. That's your off time. You're raising them up. You teach them to go to bed at 8 o'clock every evening. You get home by 6. Dinner, homework, bed. Dinner, say it again. Dinner, homework, bed. Dinner, homework, bed. So at 8 o'clock, between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night, you get 2 hours to be yourself. You get to do your housework, walk around your house, spend some one-on-one time with your partner. That's your off time. You teach your children, now look, this is how we're going to do this. You start telling them from they're young. So many parents just leave it like free willy. You can't be free willy. Give them boundaries. If they're going over next door, don't go in anybody's house. Let me see you on the front lawn. If they invite you in the basement, don't go down there. Set the boundaries. So they know. Because the first thing little Johnny is going to come back over here and tell, oh, Mr. John told me he invited me down into the basement, Mommy. And then you go over there and Mr. John is no longer Mr. John when you're done with him, because that's just what happens. But do you see what I mean? Set the boundaries. When they go over to grandma's house, play in the living room so grandma can see you. You're not telling them to go play with stuff, go look for guns, weapons, and all kinds of stuff. Give them boundaries. Just think about it. Think about how wild of a child you were. And that should give you some idea. You know what? I better tell him not to do this because I used to do that. It is what it is. Set some boundaries for our children. And make sure that we work to protect our children who live within these borders. So other people don't think it's okay to ever come to Michigan or whatever state you live in to participate because they see your kid walking around the zoo and just for a second you turn your back in 2 seconds. You ever hear parents say that sometimes? He was just right here. I just turned my back for 2 seconds. It was less than 20 seconds. You ever hear parents say, I'm just so overwhelmed. I just needed a break and I just turned my back for 2 seconds. Let us work to ensure that we protect our children. We need to be a village. Folks, you're out there seeing some child wandering. Stay there with the child and call 911. Just say, honey, we're going to stay right here till we find your mommy. Okay, we're calling the police. 911, I have a little kid here. I'm at such and such a location. We can't find his mommy. Would you send somebody over here? Do you see what I'm saying? Become a village. Don't just let some guy walk up and say, that's my kid. And the poor child is looking behind you like, that really, and they're like, shut up, I'll rip your body if you say anything. Be a village. Yeah. And protect ourselves so that nobody at any time ever feel like they can come here and do this to our children. Right? It is on, folks. It's something. It's something. I kid you not. It's something. It really is tremendous, right? Sex tourism. Who would have thought? This is why I never wanted to talk about it. Forgive me. Forgive me. I did not want to touch the subject because it's something that I feel deeply. I connected with an author from Iowa about 8 years ago, and her own story of how she came to be aware of sex trafficking was something that moved me. And the book, The Heavens Are Telling. I'm going to tell you how to get the book. You got to read this stuff. You can't make this stuff up, folks. You can't make this stuff up. You can't you can't it's on Amazon. I'm going to go to Amazon and look it up so I can tell it, because the author wrote one book and then they went back and visited the shelter where they had set up, and they looked at the children, right? So in books, and it's called The Heavens Are Telling, right? And I want to tell you about it because it's something that people don't recognize, right? The book is called The Heavens Are Telling, and the author has a few other stories, and I didn't really want to tell the story, to be honest with you. The Heavens Are Telling. All right. So the book is called The Heavens Are Telling, not by it's not music. Oh Jesus. They're giving me all music. Uh Here's the book. The Heavens Are Telling. It's by B.D. Riehl, Riehl. There are 2 books in the series, and the other one is called. You got to go get this book. I still have it on my iPad, and I kid you not, I was broken when I read this book. I was totally broken. Right? You got to read this book. You got to read it. Right? The Heavens Are Telling. And the reason the other one is called The Earth is Full. The Earth is Full. That was the first one, and I thought that was enough. The Earth is Full and The Heavens Are Telling. Make sure you go read these books. It tells the story of sex trafficking in Cambodia, and how a 10-year-old girl who was ripped from her family was placed in a brothel at 10 years old, and it followed her through till she was 18 and was delivered. Right? So whoever thought. Thanks so much for joining me, everybody. This is Harriet Kemick with Down to Earth. And I just want to tell you thanks for staying with me. Thank you. I'm humbled. Thank you so much for listening to this broadcast. Make sure you join us again. Go to harrietkemick.com for more information on the topics we talk about. And if you'd like me to come somewhere and speak, be sure to reach out to me on social media. Go to my website, harrietkemick.com. Send me an email. Let me know how you're doing and how these stories that we tell on this podcast are helping you. Make sure you listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Overcast, wherever your favorite podcast platform is. Thank you so much, everybody. Be blessed. Thanks, everybody. It is a wonderful life. Thank you. And at any day now, thank you so much.